Hi, my name is Kenny, and I'm one of the developers of the LAMBS Danger FSM, an AI enhancement mod for Arma 3. This is the first of 3 videos, and in this one I'll be talking about the design philosophy of the mod, and also the distinction between the FSM part of it, which is the core functionality, and the module system or waypoint system, which is an extended functionality. This first video will cover that, and later videos will have a more in-depth look at the Zeus modules and also the artillery and potentially the close air support module, which will come sometime in the future. So moving on to the design philosophy of the mod. The first thing that needs to be stated is that LAMBS Danger FSM was designed with co-op in mind, that is player versus environment. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you can't play PvP or Warlords or any such with it. It just means that the AI is meant to be, in a sense, expendable. They're meant to be put down by a mission maker and fulfill some part of telling that story. Let's keep that in mind as a core principle of how this thing has been designed, and also understand that AI in Arma 3 covers a lot, many different aspects. So it was designed initially as a co-op mod. It can be used in a PvP setting, but the design mentality of some of these features will reflect that. AI is essentially a weapon used to tell a story. That's the core of it. So moving on to the philosophy of the mod. One of the stated goals of the mod is to have a seamless interaction or integration with Arma 3 features and all of the sort of modded content around there, and that is where the FSM part of the mod comes. So what is the FSM? Well, the FSM, specifically the Danger FSM, is the thing that is triggered when an AI unit becomes aware of an enemy, or more directly, comes under fire. What happens then is that a different type of brain takes over from the regular formation and movement style stuff, and it is the thing that enables many of the combat actions. It's important to understand the distinction of this, because behavior combat is not identical with the danger behavior. The danger behavior only comes into play once the AI unit comes under fire or is sufficiently aware of the enemy. Now these two follow each other very closely, and the combat behavior or firefight behavior, as is listed here, is what makes the AI run into cover and do all of these things. What the LAMBS Danger FSM seeks to enhance is how the unit or AI views buildings, their ability to use vehicles, and all sorts of different features associated with that. In some of my previous videos, I've talked about the nitty-gritty or smaller details, but I'll cover some of them in very briefly in passing here. But that is the idea of a seamless interaction. It should work on all types of content to the extent or limitations of Arma itself. Oh, and as usual, I am making this video sort of rugged and raw. No special editing going into this here. This is more like a design diary, or for mission makers yourself to get behind the philosophy or what and the how ends and how is these things work. And feel free to use the comment field for your questions or any of the other mediums. So the LAMBS Danger FSM triggers when the unit enters combat mode. The most distinct part of that is probably the ability to enter buildings, and it uses that by reading the building positions that have been configured into Arma 3 buildings. And I've highlighted these on 4 of these buildings with these yellow circles. So these are the locations that the AI will seek to maneuver to whenever a building is close enough, or there's an enemy inside, or that unit's attempting to garrison the building, or even suppress that building. It looks to these configured spots, and if they are not there, perhaps for being a modded content, or if there's something wrong with the pathfinding or anything like that, it's going to look weird, it's going to break, and well, that's really just part of the Arma 3 experience. In fact, had I done this test on Tanoa, we could have pointed to some vanilla locations where the AI just simply isn't able to navigate to, and that comes to the pathfinding aspect of the AI, which we touch on, but we do not have access to fully change. And in fact, to be fair, if I did have full access myself to the pathfinding engine, I couldn't probably do anything with it, though I suspect some of my team members might be more equipped to deal with that. So what's there to say? Buildings are limited in this sense. When we use these positions, we don't use them fully 100% accurate. We try to engage some randomness to it. There are some very cool AI projects out there that make the AI sort of ray trace through buildings and do real true pathfinding and things like that. But for the sake of LAMBS Danger FSM, I deem that too much. We expect to have many AI in the field, and we can't really afford that sort of computation on the unit as well, at least not in the let's call it hacky manner, for lack of access to core engine that would have to happen. So that's distinct from the LAMBS Danger FSM. Sometimes you'll have buildings that are also weird. I'll add this, such as this building, where the AI does get confused with these locations. Doesn't really understand that it needs to go up the stairs, and will try to get to these locations from beneath on and up. And that sort of weirdness is unfortunately part of Arma 3. Seamless integration, it means manning static weapons. It means vehicles will sometimes suppress buildings. And again, AI is a lot of things. The LAMBS Danger FSM does not affect weapon configurations, and I'll talk a bit more about the personal weapon configurations in a moment, but it is important to recognize that some vehicles are just weirdly configured, such as these two. The vehicle on the left, the MRAP here, will very successfully dismantle and suppress buildings where there are enemies. The one with the minigun will, for whatever reason, refuse to do any sort of suppressive fire. That's just one of the annoyances of Arma 3. I haven't really experimented too much with changing that config. It's probably something simple or something very basic, but it is actually something that's part of Arma 3. So if you were to do a sort of suppressive fire type action on this I think it's called a Quillen, then it would fail to actually suppress. So there are aspects sort of out of our control, given by our choice of not modifying weapon configs for the LAMBS Danger FSM in order to keep that sort of seamlessness in the mod, but it is what it is. What we can also say about the weapon configuration is that sometimes these things act in ways you wouldn't expect them to. So I've talked about this more in the sort of article I did, or the weapon tests I did on AI's behavior, how it is governed by the weapon carried. I'll put a link to that in the description here. But you must understand that the AI core behavior, core pathfinding or attack behavior, which isn't affected by the LAMBS Danger FSM, tells it to maneuver in such a way as to engage the enemy at maximum or ideal range. Now, the maximum and ideal range is configured differently for each weapons. Sometimes this is sensible, sometimes it is not very clear why it is the case, and there's many variables to this, especially when you start thinking about modded content. A very clear example of this in vanilla content is the Mark 20 here and the Tavor, the TRG 20. Let's see. So both of these rifles are bullpup rifles, 5.56. They have pretty much the same barrel length. For all intents and purposes, they are very similar. So there's not even a very big difference in rate of fire on these weapons, at least in vanilla. But in the AI's hand, the TRG-21 is a long-ranged weapon where the AI is much more successful at hitting at longer ranges, whereas the Mark 20 is configured as a close combat weapon. And again, in a player's hand, there's no real difference between these two weapons, but the AI reads and interprets them differently. That's why you're going to see different type of behavior, very much based on what kind of weapon they're carrying. And of course, that isn't, the weapon config isn't touched by the LAMBS Danger FSM. It's an important distinction to make, and that sort of madness gets even bigger once you start adding modded content to this equation. But check my check my post on that instead. So the LAMBS Danger FSM triggers seamlessly, makes the AI use static weapons, abandon static weapons if the enemy's danger close. It makes the AI use vehicles to engage and suppress buildings. It has a ton of different tactical modules to it, or functionalities to it. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and you don't need to script anything. You don't need to do anything. All you need to do is place down the units and give them some sort of order or not. And of course, you can disable that behavior by doing AI disable like so. That is the FSM part. Now moving on to the module part, or what is indistinguishable actually from the waypoint part of the game. And the reason I say waypoint is that the first implementation of them had waypoints like this, where you could, and you still can, add a waypoint to them, and they will do that. He will move there, and he will engage in a task patrol at the default range as listed at 200 meters. This is a nice and easy way of doing things, but it does come with a limitation. Now, you might expect to be able to do something like this and change each of these waypoints to a task patrol. And thereby create some sort of chain of task patrolling. That is not the case. These waypoints are designed to be end states, and that feeds into the principle of the design. It's designed with a co-op mentality in mind. These AI units are meant to be weapons of telling your story. You're supposed to give them a simple command and then just fire and forget them. They are not engaged in any company level or higher intelligence in terms of finding and seeking out the enemy. Now, with that said, is it impossible to get them to do what we just saw here, or start out in a camp and then move on to a patrol and so on? No, it is not. But to do so, you will need a bit of in-depth understanding of how the mod works and how the sort of tasks and things can be reset and so on. Now, the best source of that is simply to be a bit savvy on reading scripts, and I should just read the functions themselves as seen on GitHub. There's a bit of documentation there as well. You could also experiment with a bit of, but understand that the core functionality was designed with the end state mentality in mind. So if you were to want to put a garrison here and have that have dynamic patrols, and part of them being proactive or hunting forces, the best way to do so is actually to create distinct groups and give them direct roles. And that's because when you're a mission maker, you're also kind of like a storyteller or even a film director or something like that. And we do not want to override that control, because again, we are a co-op mod, and we also want that sort of seamless integration that doesn't really mess with the mission designer's intentions or goals. So if I wanted to set up a simple garrison here, I'd put down a garrison, large group. The closer one, I'd put on a guard waypoint. That's the vanilla guard waypoint. These guys will move to respond to any spotted contacts, and these guys I'd put on a patrol. Easy peasy like that. If I went to go in there, these units would move into the garrison positions in a random pattern. There'd be a patrol going on, and this small four-man fire team would act as a QRF. if these modules weren't there, you'd have to put them manually in each building and so on, and that's the sort of time-saving saving loop that we have here. So this is what I mean when I talk about the modules and waypoints. They are indistinguishable in the function they call, but they are separate in how you enable them. So the waypoint was the first implementation. We are now working with the module system, and the module system is much more powerful in many ways. So the same thing you just saw, we could do with a patrol system. So what you do is you put down the module, and if you double click the module, you'll have much more information, things you can tweak here. In the case of the patrol, you can set up how many waypoints the unit will create around or the loop. You can set up if there will be a dynamic patrol pattern. So every time those 4 waypoints are completed, the unit will now pick 4 new waypoints within the area, and so on. And many of these modules have an AO like this, which you can tweak and toggle. And the use of these modules is very simple. You select either of these and you sync it to the unit like so. This unit will now start patrolling like that. There's another more advanced version of this as well, where you can and you can sync multiple units to the same module. That's not a problem at all. It can be any member of the unit. It's not a problem either. You can do this with any of the modules. I'm just working with a patrol module to make it easier right now. So let's have the other patrol module. Let's sync this to that, and we can also put down a trigger, and I'm going to put on as an activation, I'm just going to say Radio Juliet, and I'm going to sync that to that module. So what will happen now is that Patrol A will start patrolling immediately, and Patrol B will wait until whatever this trigger, in our case based on a radio, then they will start patrolling. And in this case they'll also have a much larger area to patrol. So we can demonstrate that quite easily. I'll go in here and if I inspect it, you can see Patrol A, they're moving, Patrol B are not. But if I call the radio, these guys immediately start moving. And obviously you could trigger them on any type of trigger, enemy present or whatnot, and it also works on all of the modules. So that is how the core functionality of the module system works, and also a bit of a longer part on the philosophy, design philosophy of LAMBS Danger FSM compared to other AI mods and even in itself. So to summarize, LAMBS Danger FSM is built with a co-op focus. It is built to have a seamless integration with vanilla and modded content to the full extent of our ability. It also has an extended functionality which comes in the module system, and each module is designed to be an end state, but there are ways of skipping that, and I'll actually cover that more once I get to the Zeus implementation video. And that's it for this time. Thank you for watching.